We're going live, Ms. Nerva, if you hear me. Okay, we're on Facebook Live and I'm going to record as well. Welcome to our presentation this afternoon for our Mental Health Awareness Month. And this month, we've been talking about a lot of topics that have to do with mental health. Tonight, we're going to talk about suicide awareness. The world needs you. We're going to introduce ourselves, our team, so that we can get started. And if you want to join the conversation, feel free to join in. You can send us questions on Facebook Live or Instagram. You can also send us questions. You can also send me a text if you want to join the Zoom as well. Right now, we're going to let our team introduce themselves, and then we will we'll go from there. Miss Jasmine, can you go first? Just introduce yourself, who you are on the team, what do you do? You can talk about what other things you do as well.
Yeah, sure. Now?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Hi, everyone. I am Jasmine Ray. I am a master's level clinical counseling. I have been with Sound Living for the last 2 years. My primary focus is trauma. I work with young adults, adults, as well as older adults. So my span right now is about 4 to about 70, which is quite a nice span. I am trauma certified. I am EMDR trained, which is one thing that I kind of bring special to Sound Living, is that I have that training behind me. I am a program director for First Episode Psychosis Initiative. So I also work with some severe mental health issues such as schizophrenia, schizoaffective, borderline personality, and other mood disorders. That's me.
All right, Miss Nerva. We can't hear you. No. We'll come back. Go ahead, Miss Alicia, go ahead and introduce yourself next. We'll come back, Miss Nerva.
Hi, my name is Alicia Wright. I am an intern with Sound Living Counseling Center, and I will be a master's level counselor soon working with this center. Yeah, that's about it.
That's fine. What about Tracy Ann?
My name is Tracy Ann Hutchinson. I am one of the interns at Sound Living Counseling Center as well, and I'm in the master's program of clinical mental health counseling at Southern Adventist University.
All right, Miss Hannah.
My name is Hannah Knowles. I'm currently an undergraduate psychology student at Southern Adventist University, and I'm doing my internship at Sound Living.
And Nerva, if you're ready, you can try again for me.
Okay, hi. Hi, can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. Hi, good evening. My name is Nerva Ashe. I have my master's in marriage and family therapy. Been with Sound Living for about a month now. Been seeing children from age 12 and then adults also, especially young ladies. I've been working with, prior to coming to Sound Living, I was with Department of Children's Services for 15 years. I serve as a supervisor, mainly in leadership role, and as a caseworker also. I'm reaching out a lot toward the trying to target mental health issues with the Haitian population around here because it's growing. So we're trying to started a ministry called Broken Healer. So trying to do different things. But thank you for having us today.
Perfect. And I'm April Taylor. We're the owner and founders of Sound Living Counseling Center. So I'm excited to be here, excited to have our team, part of our team. We actually have a couple of guys, Mike and Jay, who aren't here today, but hopefully they'll be able to join us at another time. But we also do men, and they generally handle that population. We're glad we've talked about everything from just tired of being strong. We talked about OCD. We've talked about just mental health in general. And then this is our last topic for this month because it ends today. And we're going to talk about suicide awareness. And so I want to do, before we kind of jump into a PowerPoint, we've got a brief PowerPoint, but I want to kind of just poll the group and talk about what suicide means, just talk about it in general. We can, let's just kind of have a conversation about it. And we may or may not use the PowerPoint. We want to just kind of talk about suicide, what it means. And we really want to help people. Our goal today is to help you know what to do if you feel suicidal, or if you know someone who's suicidal, because there is hope and help available. So our whole goal today is to make sure everybody knows there's hope available. So anybody can jump in if you have any kind of thoughts, or just in general, like what is suicide? What is suicide awareness? What do we kind of want people to know about suicidal awareness?
I think some of the things that commonly accompany suicide, besides the obvious desire to take one's life, is other things like a feeling of helplessness and hopelessness. Just kind of reaching that stage where you feel like there's no point in going on, there's no reason for living, that kind of thing. That is also one of the common distinguishing features of suicide.
Okay, very good. Anybody else any feedback about what it is or what we're kind of talking about, just setting up the conversation?
I think one of the biggest things as a provider is like the stigma around suicide, and people not fully understanding the multitude of it, like Tracy Ann mentioned, the hopelessness that's often surrounded by it, and not all, really fully understanding the difference between like the attempts of suicide as well as like just the education behind how people can get to such a isolated space that would feel like it's the only option. But I definitely think as a provider, just really breaking away from the stigma and having open conversations about it like this one. So I was really excited I could join today too.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Any other thoughts about what it is? Who are we dealing with? What kind of populations are we dealing with when we talk about suicide awareness?
Well, we could see that with technology being, or social media being so popular nowadays among the teens, it's very much, suicide is very high among teens, among Black people. Sometimes you didn't used to hear suicidal ideation among our culture, but nowadays, it's across the board. It doesn't skip generation. It doesn't do anything. You're hearing the younger children are having suicide ideation. And also, we used to have a myth that, don't use that word suicidal and stuff with people, but usually they are thinking about it. So yes, you need to use the word, or mention the word, because oftentimes they are thinking about hurting themselves. So it's not a thing that to say not don't say the word suicide, then once you say it, it's gonna bring the idea of suicide in their head. Oftentimes they are thinking about it, so it's okay to go ahead and mention it and ask them the questions.
Absolutely. You use the word ideations. Does anybody want to define that for us? Because sometimes I like to break things down and make them as simple as possible, because sometimes we use clinical jargon that we understand, but the audience may not understand that. So can somebody explain what ideation means?
Sure. So suicide ideation is referred to as like thinking about or considering suicide. It's often attached to having a plan sometimes, or just kind of having the overwhelming feeling of wanting to cause self-harm.
Okay, thank you. And if we use a word like that, let's break it down, because we want to make sure our audience is with us, because sometimes we just take that for granted because we know these terms and we use them every day, but not everybody uses the same terms every day. So we want to make it as understandable as possible. So I think I want to jump into the PowerPoint a little bit, and because Miss Hannah put together some facts for us, and I want to use those statistics to talk about it a little bit. But then I want, as we go through each slide, I want you guys to jump in and help me talk about it, like, because we're just going to do like a general overview, but then I want you guys to add some conversation to it, if that makes sense. So we'll kind of do it together. Of course, we got to. That's interesting. Okay, we'll get started. So we've got suicide. I'm gonna go back to our first screen because it was really cute. Suicide awareness. This world needs you. So we really want to talk about what it is, why we're having the conversation, and how it affects individuals and people in our family. So it might affect us, it might affect somebody else we know. So we want to keep that in mind as we kind of go through this conversation. And we're going to talk about things like the importance of awareness, risk factors, warning signs, and then we're going to talk about healing. When we think about the importance of suicide awareness, we really need to think about the statistics. Globally, 800,000 people die from suicide every year. That's according to the World Health Organization. Suicide is the 10th leading cause of death overall in the United States. And these are 2021 statistics. So that's a huge number if it's the 10th largest cause of death. It's also the second leading cause of death among individuals between 10 and 34, and the fourth leading cause of death between 35 and 54. So those are very young and then middle age, and probably surprising to hear people as young as 10 to have committed suicide. So that's what Nerva was referring to. A lot of our young people are dying by suicide. And then the preferred word is dying by suicide instead of committed. So we should be saying dying by suicide. Males represent 79% of all statistics. And that's a huge number. And that's because males are more likely to follow through on a threat. If they say they're going to do something, they're more likely to go ahead and do it. Females attempt it 3 times more often than males. So males are more, if we want to call it successful, they die more often by suicide. Females attempt more often. And then veterans also have higher than average rates of suicide, according to the CDC. We talked about some of these factors like hopelessness, substance abuse and alcohol disorder is a very, very huge number, a very huge factor. Other factors include trauma, major medical illnesses, previous suicide attempts, family history of suicide, job and financial stress, loss of relationship, easy access to means. And when we say means, we mean like you having access to how you would participate, how you would die by suicide. So like you may have a gun, or you may have access to a knife, or choose some substance. Lack of support or a sense of isolation. And then, as Jasmine mentioned earlier, the stigma associated with suicide. And I want to stop here and ask if anybody wants to kind of comment on any of those, or why do you think these are important factors, or what do we need to know about these?
I think one thing that you kind of touched on with one of the statistics, it's always really alarming when people see it, is that men commit suicides at such a higher rate. And you mentioned this, it's because they use lethal ways to actually die by suicide. So men are often gun owners, or just have more lethal ways of doing so, versus females who often do overdoses and are usually unsuccessful because people can find them. One of the things with the risk factors, being a trauma therapist, is the thing about trauma is it never goes away. So being a trauma therapist is all about just reprocessing that trauma and giving people hope inside of those very desperate and hopeless situations. But if they aren't talked about, and in our community, I think we're doing a lot better, particularly with the pandemic coming on. I've seen mental health really skyrocket, and people are having those tough conversations. But prior to that, in our community, things are often swept under the rug. And so lots of trauma happen behind closed doors, and people don't really talk about it. And all of that stays with you, regardless of how resilient you may be. Being able to get through the next day doesn't necessarily qualify as living. And so I think sometimes that just kind of builds up, and this sense of aloneness and hopelessness kind of creeps in, and suicide feels like the only option, because the life you're currently living doesn't feel worthy of, living. And so I think that plays a huge role into the other risk factors, because often alcohol and substance abuse comes with trauma. Lack of resources comes with trauma. I relate everything to trauma because I'm a trauma therapist, but all those things really do. If there's no job or no financial support, that's traumatic. To watch your family go homeless or hungry, that's really traumatic. To lose friendships or relationships, those things can also be traumatic. And I think we all handle them, of course, differently, but at the end of the day, it all gives us a sense of hopelessness to some extent. And so not having a safe place to kind of talk about that is how we get to some of these risk factors.
Very good. Anybody else, any other feedback? Go ahead.
On the previous slide, when you were talking about veterans having a higher rate of suicide, it just kind of reminded me when I was talking to my friends, and the effect of COVID that's had on him and some of his colleagues, is that COVID kind of led to them having PTSD over, because it kind of put in the perspective of fear or threat of an enemy they can't see until too late. And the hopelessness and also the isolation that they've also experienced due to not being able to have access to social supports, even mental health services, before telehealth came to be. And so, like when you mentioned veterans having a higher rate of suicide, and also this weekend being Memorial Weekend, it kind of hit home that conversation that I had.
Absolutely. Any other comment?
But we could say that if they had prior mental health illness, that could play a role in too. Like if they were having anxiety or depression already. So that with the pandemic, with everything else happening, with all those different stresses, that could increase the risk of having those.
Yes, ma'am, absolutely. And I was going to say something about the previous suicide attempts or the family history. So those are very high. They're comorbid with suicide risk, because either that because they've had an attempt before or because somebody else in the family has had an attempt. And so those make the numbers go up. So we have to pay extra special close attention to somebody whose family member has died by suicide or who has had a previous attempt. So I just wanted to make sure I pointed that out to a family member so that we can kind of pay attention with that. So what are some warning signs? What are some things that we need to watch out for? We have some on our screen, but you guys can kind of jump in and say something about the warning signs.
Well, I don't know if one that's mentioned on your screen because I haven't gotten a chance to read everything, but one that is often mentioned is just things like writing farewell notes to loved ones or starting to give away your possessions and things like that. That's usually an indication of already preparing the way and already kind of just having this plan in mind and just, you know, being serious about carrying it through. So those are things to watch for.
Absolutely. Anything else? So we talking about wanting to die or kill themselves, looking for a way to kill themselves, like searching for a gun online. I'm talking about feeling helpless or hopeless, having no reason to live. Talking about feeling trapped, feeling in an unbearable pain. And that pain reminds us that a lot of people with chronic pain or chronic illness often die by suicide as well, or have suicidal ideations or thoughts of suicide. Talking about being a burden to others or feel like you don't have a reason to be here. Increasing the use of alcohol or drugs, withdrawing or isolating themselves, sleeping too much or too little. And as somebody already pointed out, those are also signs of mental health. So we kind of want to keep that in mind as we think about that mental illness itself is comorbid with suicidal ideations or thoughts of suicide. Would you guys add anything to that? Anything else about warning signs? What do we need to look out for from a trauma perspective, or what are we looking out for in our sessions?
Somebody all of a sudden they fixated on death, things to do with death, talking about dying, or you know, they just, everything is, you know, they looking at, you know, stuff, dark stuff that are more dark than normal. And, you know, they talk about it, they could write about it, they just fixated on dying. That might be a sign also.
Absolutely.
One warning sign that I also heard about in something my church was discussing among teens is that sometimes when you see a family member or someone going through a hard time, or, you know, withdrawing, and, you know, the opposite side of just having, you know, showing negativity or things, but then they all of a sudden start showing happy moods, being enjoyable. They mentioned that sometimes that's a way for them to kind of make sure that when they do commit suicide, they left their family on a good note, or they have the energy to go and die of suicide. So that was something interesting that I heard mentioned regarding teens and suicide.
So that brought up another thought. Medication is very important. It's something that we use, but it's also something we have to watch for warning signs as well. So there are black box labels on some medications. So we have to watch those labels to make sure that if a person does get on medication, that we're watching them more closely for suicidal thoughts. And as well, sometimes what Alicia mentioned is that the medication will give you a boost enough, like the energy enough to go ahead and commit the act. And we don't want that, of course, but, and that's why going to counseling and going to a doctor, like your PCP or your psychiatrist is important, because the counselor is going to see the client much more frequently. And so because we're seeing them more frequently, we can kind of pick up on those changes. One other thing that we didn't mention is there are diseases that are comorbid for medication, and comorbid for mental illness, and thereby for suicidal thoughts. And those diseases include stroke, diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure. All of those things are comorbid for, and when I say comorbid, I mean they exist with mental illness, more likely to have either anxiety or depression if you have stroke, heart disease, diabetes. And there are some other ones too, like black mold. And ladies, help me if I leave something out. But it's important to know that and think about it, because if somebody has recently had a heart attack or recently had a stroke or recently had some of these things, and the pandemic has increased these things, by the way, so therefore we've increased the risk of suicide. So I want to just make sure we put that in this conversation. Anybody add anything about that?
I'll just add one other thing. I know that thyroid issues can also be a common, can be comorbid with anxiety, depression, and suicide as well.
Thank you. I know I was leaving something out. And what that means for you, let's say if you have some of those things, like if you have heart disease or diabetes or thyroid disease or any of those things that we mentioned, that means you need to take care of your mental health. You may need to go to a counselor. You may need to call your doctor and talk about how you're feeling. If you're feeling sad, if you're feeling, and we didn't really talk about the mental health symptoms, but we probably should do that. But things like sadness, hopelessness, lack of sleep or oversleeping, lack of appetite or overeating. Ladies, I'm sure I'm leaving out some. So some other symptoms maybe of anxiety as well.
Increase or decrease in mood, irritability, agitation, any abnormal aggression. I don't know. I can't think of anything else.
I think that's a pretty good list, unless somebody else has one. Did you have one, Tracy?
Fatigue as well.
Say it again.
Fatigue.
Yes, for sure, for both anxiety and depression. So we want to talk about what those are. Let's talk about healing. What does it look like to? What does it look like to heal? What do we do as counselors? What can somebody like a family member do if they know somebody, or even if it's themselves? What can we do if we're feeling like harming ourselves or not being here? What are some things we can do to get better? I'm opening the floor for you guys to jump in. We got some hits on the screen, but
I think really just opening the conversation, like I mentioned in the beginning, really taking away the stigma associated with it and looking at it for what it is. This person is saying, this life that I currently have feels unbearable. And what we all know is that our lives can change. We can create new paths. We can make new decisions. Things, when you're inside of that mind frame, it feels really hopeless, but ultimately, if a person is reaching out to you to talk about these things, they're saying that, like, I think that things could be different and I'm needing some help to be able to get there. So I think having an open conversation, of course, supporting them, trying to help them find counsel, therapists, whoever, someone that's, trusted and aware of suicide, who can be able to hear their story, but also give them, guidance and support as they grow through that. I think also just following up with them. So sometimes there's like a suicide attempt inside of a family, and then that member gets the help that they need, and things just kind of go back to what was perceived as normal. I like to always tell my clients, we don't want to try to go back to anything, because obviously something wasn't going the way it needed to be going in order for us to get there. So I think just doing that follow-up as well, of checking back in, are you feeling like yourself? Is there anything that I can do for you? And just reminding them that like you haven't forgotten that they had a really difficult time. And that doesn't mean like continuously bringing it up, but bringing it up enough in the sense that they don't feel like, oh, now it's just completely over and everybody thinks I'm fine. Because I think that's when you run the risk of like them actually doing it, like Alicia mentioned earlier. So I think just being mindful of that as well.
Would anybody else like to add anything to that part of the conversation about what we can do about healing? Yes, Tracy.
Well, for me, when I think about working with clients who may be struggling with suicidal thoughts, I think of 3 specific theoretical approaches, and of course, it's not limited to the 3 of them, but these are the 3 that pop up in my mind. And I think of person-centered, just really extending that warmth and empathy and that unconditional positive regard to those clients, something that maybe they perhaps never experienced all of their lives, or maybe even in that time, especially with a stigma surrounded with suicide and mental health issues. So just being able to create that open, warm environment in which they can feel like somebody cares for them, in which they can feel comfortable with sharing their concerns without fear of judgment. And then I think of the existential approach as well. Just really kind of trying to work with them to find out what is their purpose for living. Is there something that would keep them from actually going through with that plan to die by suicide, and just helping them to find meaning in their everyday lives, meaning whether it might be in their values or in their relationships with others, or whatever source that might be, helping them to identify a specific thing that they can hold on to that can give them that source of encouragement to keep going on. And my favorite theoretical mode is actually the cognitive behavioral approach. So, and I think with suicidal ideations, it comes with a lot of, as we mentioned before, that sense of hopelessness and helplessness, those negative thoughts. And I think it was Jasmine who mentioned just kind of helping clients to rewrite their perspectives of trauma, for instance. And that can be applied to any situation at all, just helping clients to reframe or rewrite those stories from those negative perceptions to more positive perception. So I think those are some of the theoretical modalities that we can keep in mind when working with clients.
Alicia, I think you were going to add something. Thank you, Tracy, and that was very good, very, very thoughtful. Miss Alicia?
Yes, I was just going to touch on with what Jasmine said, and now also Tracy said, just creating that like welcoming, therapeutic, supportive environment, and just helping those, who are, facing this, or even helping ourselves to kind of take things one day at a time. I know sometimes when we're weighed about things, overwhelmed, we see all that has to be done by this time or by that time, and kind of just like Jasmine's saying, like, look at it as a new path, let's just focus on what we can do right now and then start working toward what's next. And then start the conversation. I feel like we sometimes have this thought that if we don't talk about something, it's not there. And with suicide, it's definitely something we need to discuss. I know, like, we don't want to put things in, people's minds or be influencing them, but like, if it's there, it's already needs to be talked about. And it's just kind of removing that stigma that's around suicide and how we see even mental illness.
Thank you, ladies. I want to go to the next slide because I want to offer some hope, and we can't even see the full slide, so I might have to try to slide it down. But basically refers to the semicolon, and there's like a semicolon project where people put a semicolon tattoo, or they use a semicolon to represent the fact that, you know, the semicolon puts a place in the sentence where it's not supposed to end, and so it represents that a place in our life where we're not supposed to end. And I want to use that that to kind of go into a conversation about, there was a time, part of Sound Living, we have kind of 3 reasons or 3 whys for being here. But one of them happens to be the fact that I was suicidal at one point in my life. And I think about the semicolon, and if I had not been here, none of Sound Living would happen. None of the work that we're doing now, none of this would be here had I died by suicide. So I think of that, and it's jolting, just the thing. I mean, it gives me hope. Like, wow, how much life came out of like post being suicidal. So and I share that to say I was saved, I was sanctified, I was married, I had the job, I had the car, the husband, everything people want. I had all of that, but I was suicidal. So it has nothing to do sometimes with having things, or you know, we talked about poverty and we talked about some things that could be affected, but I was hopeless. I had a crisis in my life, and it was my response to the crisis. And so sadly enough, were it not for intervention, and I had great intervention. I had a friend who intervened, who told me to go to the doctor. I actually went to my OBGYN, who told me, you know, who sent me to a counselor, and I took some medicine, and I also went to Valley to the outpatient program. All of those things helped me to still be here. So I share that with the hopes of people knowing that there is hope. There is help available. There is something, and there's a semicolon in my life. Like, after all of this, all of Sound Living happened after that semicolon. And I share that for hope for you, because if you feel like not being here, think about, I love how Tracy Ann mentioned the existential approach, because I definitely talk to people about purpose. I spend a lot of time talking about purpose and you know, a reason for living, meaning for life. I have a meaning much more now than I had at that time. Like I always had a meaning for living, but I didn't know what it was. But now I do. And when you have a meaning, it gives you a reason to be here. It gives you hope. I have something to look forward to every day. I have something to, you know, helping people helps me. So there may be that helping people help you move forward. But I share that just because I just want people to know that you matter, and we want you here. We're here to support you. We're here to help you. We have a team of counselors at Sound Living, but you don't have to call us. You could call your PCP. You could call any doctor. They'll know what to do. You could call any counselor. They'll know what to do. Tell your teacher. If you know, just tell somebody. And then that somebody will, just like my friend, she didn't know exactly what to do, but she got me the help I needed. She told me to call my doctor. So I called my doctor, and the ball spin after that. So we can, I mean, there is hope available. But if you don't reach out, nobody's going to know. We're not going to be able to help. And if you're a friend and you've got somebody in that situation, we're going to put up some resources at the end, like the suicidal hotline number. There are different things that we can do to kind of help us, to help you get in touch with somebody so that you can still be here. Ladies, would you add anything to that while we're in the semicolon conversation? No comment?
No. I mean, I think it was a beautiful illustration of the fact that, you know, sometimes we might have these pauses in our lives, so to speak, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it must mean or must equal a pause to our lives completely. You know, so we might feel like we're at a standstill. We might feel like we're at this roadblock, and like we can't go on, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the only option is to take your life.
Very good.
You could, I often say, look at life. I mean, look at it as a bump on the road. A bump doesn't mean that it's the end. It could mean you have to climb up, you have to go around, or you have to just find other means to get to your destination. But it doesn't mean that, hey, it's all over and that's it. So you just have to find other meaning.
So we're gonna point out some resources. Again, thanks to Hannah for putting this PowerPoint together for us. We appreciate you. And the interns are great. They do a lot of work around here. There's a lot going on behind the scenes. So they make us look good and they kind of pull this stuff together for us a lot, or lots of other things that happen in the office. And we are back in the office at 6727 Heritage Business Court, Suite 720. You can get counseling virtually and in the office now. So either one, whatever your preference is. So we want you to be safe, but you can call us. Our phone number is 423-682-7203. Much of this information was taken from the Suicide Prevention Lifeline website, which is cited here. And then there's a suicide prevention number, 800-273-8255. And does anybody know the text number? There's also a text.
Yeah, it's 741-741.
Okay, the text is 741-741. Thank you, Miss Alicia. And then there are other ways to reach us at Sound Living. We have a Facebook page. We have a Sound Living website. We're on Instagram. We have a Break the Stigma page where we talk about with other counselors. So that's available. And then we also have Sound Living Foundation page. So reach out to us on social media. We have a YouTube page too, which I don't see up here. But we also have a YouTube page. So this and all of the previous presentations are available on YouTube. So you can go out there and see and get the information out there if you miss this conversation today, or if you missed one of the previous conversations. Would you ladies like to add anything else as we wrap up today? Everybody's good? Well, thank you. Thank you for a lively conversation. It's an important conversation. We're trying to be ahead of the game and talk about this. I like to talk about it on the front end rather than the back end. We can come out to your school, to your church. We can let us know if you need to have this conversation with a group. We're happy to do that with you. Just reach out to us at Sound Living Counseling Center, 423-682-7203. We'll be happy to help. Thank you. And thank you, ladies. Y'all have a great evening. Thank you for spending part of your holiday with us too. That was really sweet for you guys to sacrifice some time to talk about this important conversation.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Y'all have a great rest of your weekend.
Thank you.
You too.
Okay, bye-bye. All right.